she arrived at the country house without telling her husband. What she found changed everything. The distance between us. Claire Bennett had always believed that love was something you nurtured daily, like a plant that, though beautiful at first bloom, would wither if ignored. In the early years of her marriage to Ethan Carter, that belief had served her well. Their love had been a vibrant, blossoming thing, full of laughter, shared dreams, and late-night conversations that meandered until dawn. But love, as Claire was beginning to realize, could also be slowly and silently starved. It didn't always die in a storm. Sometimes it faded quietly in the shadows of routine, responsibility, and unresolved pain. The cracks had started subtly. Ethan, once so eager to rush home from work to tell her about his day, now lingered longer at the office. He used to cook dinner with her, their elbows brushing in their small kitchen, music playing in the background. These days, she ate alone. At first, Claire told herself it was just a phase work had picked up. He was stressed. Maybe she was being too sensitive, but as weeks turned into months, the ache of loneliness began to settle into her bones. They still said, "I love you," but it had become a habit like brushing your teeth or turning off the lights before bed. Mechanical, expected, hollow. Claire worked as a freelance interior designer. Her clients loved her eye for balance, the way she could take an empty space and infuse it with warmth, soul, and memory. But at home, she struggled to bring that same comfort to her own life. Their house, a 2-story townhouse on a quiet street in the city, had begun to feel like a set well decorated but lifeless. She had thought a child would change things. They had tried for nearly 4 years, each negative test, a silent blow, each appointment with the fertility specialist, another needle to her hope. Eventually, they were told the chances were slim. Claire wept. Ethan didn't. He just said, "We'll be okay," and went back to his blueprints. It wasn't that Ethan didn't love her. Claire believed he did, but he had always struggled with emotion, with expressing the deep currents beneath his calm surface, and now with the grief of their infertility, he had become a fortress. Steady, quiet, unreachable. There were moments she caught him staring off into nothing, or coming home with the scent of pine or soil on his jacket. Not city scents. And when she asked, he would smile almost distracted and say, "Just needed some fresh air." The questions piled up. Where was he really going? Why had he started locking his phone? Why did he need a separate keyring labeled "old place"? Claire didn't want to believe the worst, but the weight of unspoken truths was becoming unbearable. One Thursday evening after dinner, eaten in silence, Claire stood at the window, watching the drizzle paint streaks on the glass. Ethan was in his study, the door slightly ajar, murmuring on a call. She caught a few words. "I'll be back Sunday. Keep everything ready." He hadn't told her he was going away. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Claire quietly rose from bed. In the guest room closet tucked behind old coats was a spare set of car keys. She held them in her hand, her heart pounding. For months she'd ignored the signs, given him space, but something inside her whispered, "Find out." And so, without telling her husband, Claire decided she would go to the country house, the one he never mentioned anymore, the one they hadn't visited together in years. She didn't know what she was expecting to find, but something told her, whatever it was, it would change everything. Whispers in the silence. The days that followed Claire's conversation with Ethan felt like moving through thick fog. Everything looked the same, but something was off. Ethan still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still texted her sweet nothings midday, and still slid into bed late at night, whispering, "Sorry." Long day again, but Claire felt the growing distance. The dullness in his smile, the way he no longer asked her about her writing, her ideas, her dreams. She wanted to believe it was just the stress. Ethan had always been a perfectionist, pushing himself until his body nearly gave out. But as she sat in the kitchen one afternoon, leafing through the mail, something caught her eye, a charge from a boutique flower shop in Pineville. Claire's brow furrowed. Pineville was 2 hours away. They had no friends there, no clients, no family. She picked up another envelope and another. A receipt from a small organic grocery store also in Pineville. A payment to a local handyman. None of it made sense. Ethan had told her he was working overtime at the firm, not renovating a place 2 hours away. Claire didn't jump to conclusions. She was a writer, logic and depth before emotion, but her instincts had started to whisper in the silence of their home. That evening, Ethan came home unusually quiet. His eyes darted to the unopened bills on the kitchen counter, but said nothing. Claire watched him carefully, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay at work?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Ethan replied quickly, almost too quickly. "Just tired. We've been pitching a new client, late meetings, travel, you know." She nodded but said nothing. The pause that followed should have invited honesty, but instead he changed the subject. How was your day? Claire told him about the book club she had joined, the gardenia she finally planted on the windowsill, small quiet things. He smiled and nodded, but didn't ask further. That night, as Ethan slept beside her, Claire lay awake. Her fingers brushed the edge of the nightstand, finding the stack of mail she had quietly slid into the drawer. The receipts burned in her thoughts. She wasn't a jealous woman, but she was no fool either. A week later, Claire visited her mother-in-law, Georgia. The older woman had always been a steady presence, calm, elegant, with a fondness for tea blends and perfectly arranged living room decor. Georgia greeted her with a warm hug and a cup of hibiscus tea. As they sat on the patio overlooking the garden, Georgia smiled at her, then sighed. Ethan's been working so hard lately, hasn't he? She said with gentle concern, spending more and more time out at the cottage. It's good for him, I think. Clears his mind. Claire froze. The cottage? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. I thought we hadn't been there in... What, 2 years? Oh no, darling, Georgia replied, slightly surprised. He's been going back and forth for months now. Said he was doing some work on it, getting it ready. Maybe I thought you knew. Claire stirred her tea. Her hand, trembling slightly, must have slipped his mind, she said, forcing a small smile. Later that evening, Claire stood in their bedroom staring at the picture on their dresser, the two of them at the country house, arms around each other, sunlit smiles and the green hills behind them. They had spent every summer there until one day Ethan stopped suggesting they go, said it was too far, too much to maintain, said they had outgrown it, but apparently he hadn't outgrown it at all. She waited until Ethan had another late-night meeting. She kissed him goodbye like always and watched him drive off before retreating to the bedroom. Within minutes, she was dressed in jeans, boots, and a cardigan. She grabbed the spare keys to the cottage from the little drawer in the hallway, the one he probably forgot she knew about. No texts, no explanations. She got into the car, heart pounding. The drive was long and quiet. The deeper she drove into the countryside, the more her mind raced. What was she expecting to find? A secret woman, a hidden child, or simply a man too exhausted to come home? By the time she reached the last winding road, twilight had fallen. The trees, once golden with autumn, now loomed like silent sentinels. The air was colder here, untouched by city warmth. The cottage appeared suddenly just beyond a turn in the road, quaint, beautiful, and lived in. Lights glowed from the kitchen window. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Claire parked by the wooden gate, her breath shallow. She hesitated only a moment before stepping out, gravel crunching beneath her feet. She walked up the path slowly, every step louder than the last. In the surrounding silence, the front door was closed but not locked. She turned the knob. The house smelled like cedar and thyme. The kitchen counter was clean. A pot simmered gently on the stove. Someone was home. Claire's eyes scanned the room. 2 coffee mugs, a soft blanket thrown over the arm of the couch, a pair of shoes by the back door. Ethan's. She knew those shoes. Her breath caught. She heard movement from upstairs. Her fingers gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Every instinct told her to leave, but her heart wouldn't let her. She tiptoed across the wooden floor, up the staircase, careful not to creak the boards. At the end of the hallway, the bedroom door was ajar. Inside, a soft light glowed. She peeked in and froze. No, there wasn't a woman. There wasn't a lover. There was a child. A little boy, curled up in a blanket on the bed, clutching a small stuffed bear, fast asleep. Claire's knees gave out beneath her. She sank to the floor, heart thudding in her ears. Then a voice soft shocked Claire. She looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway, a bag of groceries in hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. What are you doing here? He whispered. Claire didn't answer. Her gaze flicked between the boy and the man she thought she knew. Her voice came out hollow. You have a child? The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was soul deep. Ethan dropped the bag to the floor. Apples rolled out. A loaf of bread bounced off the counter. I was going to tell you, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't know how. Claire shook her head slowly. How long? 2 years, he whispered. His name is Mason. He's not mine, not by blood. But you're raising him. Claire finished for him. Ethan nodded. His mother was my patient. She passed away from cancer. She didn't have anyone else. She asked me to look after him, and I I couldn't say no. Claire's vision blurred, her hands were cold, her lips trembled. So you kept it from me. Ethan knelt beside her. I didn't know how to explain. After everything we've been through, I didn't want to lose you. You lied to me, she whispered, tears spilling every day. No, I hid it from you, but I never stopped loving you. Claire pulled away. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. From the room, Mason stirred. He blinked sleepily at the two adults in the hallway. Dad? He asked. Ethan turned, forcing a smile. Hey buddy, everything's fine. Claire stood still, trembling. She turned to Ethan. I'm not leaving, not yet. But tomorrow morning, you're going to tell me everything. Every single truth. And with that, she walked into the guest room, shut the door behind her, and let her tears fall into the silence of a house that suddenly felt full of ghosts. What the walls remember, the light of early morning slipped through the cracks in the curtains, casting pale golden streaks across the wooden floor. Claire hadn't slept much. The guest room was cozy, quilted blanket, soft pillows, the scent of lavender in the air, but her mind was a storm of restless questions. Down the hall, she could hear faint footsteps, the soft clatter of pans. She closed her eyes, hoping for a moment of quiet, but memories had taken up all the space in her chest. The child Mason. The words still felt foreign on her tongue. She had imagined betrayal, infidelity, even the possibility that Ethan was leading a double life. But she hadn't imagined this, her husband caring for a child in secret, building a second home, a second routine, a second version of himself, one that she was no part of. Claire finally rose, pulling on a thick cardigan. Her bare feet padded across the warm floorboards as she stepped into the hallway. The scent of cinnamon and coffee reached her first, comforting, almost cruel in its normalcy. When she descended the stairs, she found Ethan in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with the kind of casual ease that once belonged to Sunday mornings in their city home. He looked up when he heard a ha-ha, his face unreadable. Morning, he said quietly. Claire didn't respond right away. Her gaze fell to the small table by the window. Mason sat there, feet dangling from the chair, focused on coloring inside the lines of a dinosaur drawing. A plate of pancakes sat untouched beside him. He looked up at her with curious eyes. Hi, he said, shy smile forming. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. Hi. Ethan poured her a cup of coffee without asking. He placed it gently on the counter and leaned back, his hands tucked in the pockets of his worn jeans. There were shadows under his eyes, the kind that no amount of sleep could fix. Claire sat down at the table across from Mason. The boy was beautiful, chestnut hair, wide green eyes, the faintest dimple on one cheek when he smiled. He couldn't have been older than 5. He doesn't know anything, Ethan said quietly, stepping closer. He thinks I'm just his dad, and I am in every way that matters. Claire's eyes stayed on Mason, watching how his small fingers gripped the crayon. And his real father, never in the picture. Ethan replied. His mother was alone. Her name was Isabel. She was one of my patients. Terminal, mid-30s, no family. When she realized she didn't have long, she started asking questions about foster care, adoption. She was scared he'd get lost in the system. Claire finally looked at him. So you stepped in. He nodded. She asked me directly, said she'd seen the way I talked about family, how I handled other patients' children, said she trusted me. I tried to say no. I told her my wife and I were dealing with a lot, but she kept asking. Begging. Claire's jaw tightened. And you never thought to ask your wife? Ethan exhaled sharply. Claire, you were barely getting out of bed some days. You were grieving. You blamed yourself even when I never did. I didn't want to pile this on you. That wasn't your decision to make. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know, and I'm sorry. But when Isabel passed, he had no one. I couldn't just walk away. Claire stood, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. She walked slowly around the kitchen, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter, the wooden cabinets, the small ceramic mugs hanging on hooks. This had been their dream once, this house, this space, this life. They had talked about coming here with their future children, about planting vegetables in the backyard, hanging string lights on the porch. All of it had become a quiet ache in her chest after the diagnoses and the dashed hopes. Now she saw it lived in, just not by her. I thought we were a team, Ethan. We are. You built this life without me. I tried to protect you from more pain. She turned, eyes flashing, and instead you became someone I don't even recognize. A tense silence fell between them. Then a small voice broke through. Daddy, Mason said softly. Can I have another pancake? Ethan nodded quickly and returned to the stove. Claire knelt beside the boy, offering him a faint smile. Do you like it here, Mason? She asked. He nodded. There's birds outside and frogs. She looked at his plate, then at the drawing. That's a cool dinosaur. It's a stegosaurus, he said proudly. I'm gonna be a dinosaur doctor when I grow up. Claire blinked, caught between heartbreak and wonder. She hadn't expected to care, to feel anything but anger. But now face to face with this sweet, innocent child, something else was stirring in her, something long buried. Ethan brought the pancake over and set it down gently. Thank you, Daddy, Mason said, grinning. Ethan ruffled his hair, and Claire saw it. Then what she had noticed in the dark hallway the night before. The way he looked at Mason, not like a man doing charity, not like a man trapped by obligation, like a father. Later that morning, Mason ran outside to play with the wooden truck parked beside the porch. Claire sat on the steps, a blanket draped over her shoulders, a mug of coffee in her hands. Ethan joined her but kept a careful distance. I should have told you, he said after a long pause. Every day I kept the truth. It got harder. The longer I waited, the more I feared you'd never forgive me. Claire looked straight ahead. I don't know if I can. I understand. But I also don't know if I can walk away from him. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered. But somehow Mason brought me back to life. Being around him reminded me what love looks like when it's simple. Not perfect, not easy. Just present. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But something in her heart cracked open. Maybe grief hadn't hollowed her out completely. Maybe there was still something inside her capable of love. That afternoon, Claire helped Mason water the garden. They planted 3 small sunflowers together. He insisted they name them. She wrote the names in Sharpie on tiny wooden sticks, Sunny, Goldie, and Max. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Mason reached for her hand without thinking, and Claire didn't let go. Between two truths. The guest room was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors and the distant wind pressing gently against the windows. Claire lay awake for hours, her eyes tracing the ceiling beams, her mind racing with questions that had no clear answers. She had thought about packing her things and leaving before sunrise, but something had stopped her, or someone. Mason. The innocent look on the boy's face, the way he had said Dad with such trust, such peace. That word still echoed in her chest, not with jealousy, but with a kind of aching wonder. Ethan didn't knock on the door that night. She was glad he didn't. She wouldn't have answered. The next morning, Claire woke to the smell of toast and something sweet, cinnamon maybe. She found a robe hanging on the door. It was hers, the one she had left behind years ago, washed, pressed, hanging, like a silent welcome. She walked slowly down the stairs and found Ethan in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Mason sat at the table, legs swinging, humming softly as he colored a picture of a tree. It was such a simple scene, so painfully ordinary, and yet it felt like walking into someone else's life. Ethan looked up. His eyes were tired but warm. Morning, he said softly, unsure of his welcome. Claire nodded. Morning, I made coffee, he offered, as if that might fix everything. She poured herself a cup and sat down across from Mason. The little boy smiled shyly. Hi, he said, voice high and soft. Hi, Mason, Claire replied, offering a small smile. You're really pretty, he said without hesitation, like the princess in my storybook. Claire's eyes welled up before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered, swallowing hard. They ate mostly in silence. Ethan handed Mason a napkin every time syrup got on his cheek, and Claire watched them, these two who, without her knowledge or permission, had built something fragile and beautiful together. After breakfast, Mason ran outside to play with the ball Ethan had bought him. Claire and Ethan sat at the table. The silence thick. You said you'd tell me everything, she said. Ethan nodded. I will. But it's not just one story. It's a lot of small ones that I didn't know how to piece together until it was too late. Claire stared at him, waiting. Her name was Rachel, Ethan began. She came into the clinic 2 years ago, cancer, stage 4, too young, and she had Mason. He was just barely 3. No family, no one who would take him. She had been estranged from her parents. His father was never in the picture, and she was terrified. He paused, looking at his hands. She didn't ask for money or pity. She just asked me to promise that Mason wouldn't go into the system. She said find him someone who will love him like he deserves. And then not long before she passed, she said, maybe you. Claire didn't speak. She let the words settle in. I didn't say yes. Not then. I told her I'd help find someone, but the more I spent time with Mason, the harder it became to imagine anyone else doing it. I didn't think it would be for long. I thought someone from her family might come around, but they didn't. And after she passed, I couldn't let him go. Claire looked away. Her voice was barely audible. But you didn't tell me. I was afraid, Ethan admitted. Afraid you'd think I didn't love you anymore, that I was trying to replace what we couldn't have. Claire's throat tightened, and maybe he continued. I was afraid you'd say no, that you wouldn't want him, and I couldn't choose. I couldn't send Mason away. The air between them was full of old wounds, of dreams, unspoken, of grief that had never been fully processed. Claire wrapped her hands around the mug, grounding herself in the warmth. I wish you had trusted me, she said finally. I know, Ethan whispered. I wanted to. I didn't know how. They sat in silence again, the kind that's not cold but cautious, like two people learning to breathe the same air again. That afternoon, Claire offered to read Mason a story, while Ethan fixed a broken gate outside. Mason crawled into her lap without hesitation, his small body warm against hers. As she read, his head slowly sank into her shoulder. Do you like being here? She asked softly. Mason nodded sleepily. I like the trees and the frogs. And Daddy says the stars are really bright here. Claire's heart clenched. Do you remember your mom? She asked gently. Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said she had yellow hair and she sang songs about the moon. Claire pressed a kiss to his head. That's beautiful. She said, someone nice would take care of me. He murmured, already halfway to sleep. I think she meant Daddy, but maybe she meant you too. Claire didn't cry, not then. She just held him, rocked him slowly, and let the truth of his words sink deep into the corners of her heart. That night she sat on the porch with Ethan wrapped in an old quilt, watching fireflies dance along the edge of the field. I don't know what we are anymore, she said. Me neither, Ethan replied honestly, but I want to find out. Claire looked at him, the man who had once been her everything, and now felt like a stranger and walked home at the same time. I'm not promising anything, she said. I'm not asking you to, he replied, but I'll stay for now. He reached over hesitantly and took her hand. That's enough, he whispered. The things we leave unsaid. The next morning, Claire awoke to birdsong and the rustling of leaves outside the window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The soft morning light filtered through the linen curtains, and for just a breath it felt like peace. Then she remembered the boy, the truth, the life she hadn't been told about. She sat up slowly, the unfamiliar bed creaking under her. Her suitcase remained by the door untouched, unopened. She hadn't unpacked because she hadn't decided if she was staying downstairs. The smell of pancakes drifted through the air. Claire wrapped a cardigan around her and made her way to the kitchen. Mason was already at the table. Syrup smeared on his cheek animatedly, telling Ethan about a dream where frogs could talk and trees gave hugs. Claire stood at the doorway for a moment, watching them, her husband and the child he had chosen in secret. The scene looked so natural, so loving, that her heart ached with a mix of grief and longing. She stepped into the kitchen. Morning, she said quietly. Both Ethan and Mason turned. The boy beamed. Hi, Claire, he chirped, mouth half full of pancake. Ethan gave her a cautious smile. I made coffee. She nodded, poured herself a cup and took a seat. Mason leaned in close. Can you come see my tree fort today? It's not really a fort yet, but it will be. Dad said we can build it with real wood and nails. Claire smiled softly. I'd love to. After breakfast, Ethan drove into town to pick up some supplies for work he was doing on the garden. Mason took Claire's hand and guided her to the backyard, where an ambitious pile of sticks and old boards had been shaped into a vague square. This is the base, he explained. And this part is the lookout tower. She knelt beside him. Have you built other forts before? No, Mason said, but Daddy used to build tree houses when he was little. He told me stories. I think I'm going to be an engineer or a bird. Claire laughed genuinely. Both are excellent options. As they collected more sticks and tied imaginary ropes between branches, something inside Claire began to shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but something warmer than anger, something closer to understanding. She couldn't deny what she saw in Ethan's eyes when he looked at Mason. It wasn't guilt or obligation, it was love. Pure, uncomplicated love, but love she knew too well. Didn't erase betrayal that afternoon. While Mason napped on the couch, Claire wandered into the small study Ethan had set up in the guest room. On the desk were a few medical journals, a laptop, and a box of photographs. Curiosity edged out restraint. She opened the box. Inside were pictures of Mason from babyhood to now, chubby cheeks, first steps, messy birthday cakes. But what caught Claire's breath was the one in the middle, a photo of Ethan and Mason in the snow, the boy riding on Ethan's shoulders, both of them laughing. Claire had never seen that side of her husband, not like this. Next to the box was a folded letter. She hesitated, then picked it up. To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, it means I didn't make it. My name is Rachel Avery, and this letter is my final request. Please don't let Mason go to strangers. He is a bright, kind, magical boy who deserves a life filled with love. Ethan Carter is a good man. He knows Mason trusts him. Please, if there's any mercy in this world, let him raise my son. Claire folded the letter back slowly, reverently, that evening after Mason had gone to bed and the house was still. She and Ethan sat in the quiet living room. The lamp cast a warm pool of light between them, but the space still felt vast. I found the letter, Claire said softly. Ethan nodded. I thought you might. She trusted you more than anyone. I didn't know what to do, he said, voice thick. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but after everything with us, I was scared. Claire looked at him. You should have been scared of losing me by keeping secrets. I was, he admitted. But I was also scared that asking you to accept someone else's child was asking too much. She took a slow breath. I don't know what I feel right now. Some days I think I've made peace with the fact that we'll never be parents. Other days it hits me like a fresh wound. I know, Ethan whispered. Claire stared into the space between them. And now, here he is. A little boy who didn't ask for any of this, and I don't know where I fit. You don't have to decide tonight, Ethan said. Or tomorrow. I wanted you to meet him, and I wanted him to meet the most incredible woman I know. Claire blinked back tears. You don't get to say sweet things and expect me to forget the lies. I don't want you to forget, he said, but I'm asking if you can see past them. Eventually, silence wrapped around them again, but it was no longer cold. It was a silence filled with things unsaid. Grief, hope, and the tiniest spark of possibility. That night, as Claire lay awake again, she heard the soft creak of Mason's door. Tiny footsteps padded across the hallway, then a gentle knock. She opened the door. Mason stood there, in pajamas, clutching his bare. I had a bad dream, he whispered. Can I just sit here for a minute? Claire knelt down. Of course. He crawled into her lap, his little hands holding hers. Are you mad at Daddy? He asked quietly. Claire swallowed a lump in her throat. Maybe I still am. But sometimes, grown-ups get scared too. Is that why you cried yesterday? Claire nodded. Yes, I don't like when people cry, Mason said. But when they do, I try to give them a hug. That's what Mommy used to say. And then, without waiting for permission, he wrapped his tiny arms around her. Claire closed her eyes. She still didn't know what came next. But in that moment, holding the child she never expected to meet, she finally stopped asking why. She just breathed. A different kind of family. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a golden hue across the fields that stretched beyond the old country house. Claire stood by the window in the guest room, watching as the first light touched the dew-covered grass. Her hands were wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee Ethan had left by the door that morning. No note, no words, just a quiet offering. She hadn't spoken to him since the night before. But somehow the silence between them now felt less like a chasm and more like a space waiting to be filled. Downstairs she could hear Mason's laughter echo through the walls, soft and spontaneous. It startled her, not because it was loud, but because it was happy, a real unaffected joy that reminded her of something she'd long buried, a child's presence in a home. The simple chaos of life. The mess that made a house feel alive. Claire had never wanted to replace anyone. She didn't even know if she wanted to be in this house another day, but she couldn't leave, not yet. Something deeper than curiosity or even betrayal anchored her here now, something that had to do with the boy, sleeping under this roof. When she came down to the kitchen, Mason was already at the table, a spoon in one hand, yogurt smeared across his cheek. He looked up bright-eyed and unbothered by the tension between adults. Ethan stood behind him, still in his sweatpants and hoodie, pouring juice into a glass. He paused when he saw Claire. Morning, he said, his voice tentative. Morning, Claire replied quietly. They stood in that stillness for a moment, not knowing how to bridge the gap, and then, unexpectedly, Mason held up a spoonful of yogurt. Want some? It's banana, Claire blinked, and then for the first time in days she smiled. I think I'll get my own, but thank you. Mason nodded and returned to his breakfast with the seriousness of a small boy doing a big task. I have to take him to the library later, Ethan said. They're having story time. You're welcome to come. If you want, Claire hesitated. I think I'll stay, maybe clean up the garden a bit. The roses look like they've been neglected. Ethan nodded. Yeah. Everything's been kind of in survival mode. He didn't push, and she appreciated that. In the afternoon, Claire found herself in the backyard, pulling weeds and trimming the edges of the overgrown bushes. The soil was rich and soft, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. She used to love this garden. It was the one place where she and Ethan used to dream out loud about a swing set, a picnic table under the tree, maybe even a dog. She didn't know how long she'd been working when Mason's voice startled her. "Do you like flowers?" he asked. She turned to see him standing there, a dandelion in one hand, Ethan behind him holding a tote bag from the library. "I do," Claire replied, "especially wildflowers. They're stubborn. They grow even when no one's looking." Mason nodded like he understood something important. He ran up and placed the dandelion in her hand. "This one's for you." She crouched down, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mason. You can call me Mace if you want," he added, then turned and ran toward the treehouse. Claire glanced at Ethan, who had been watching the exchange. "He likes you," Ethan said softly. "He doesn't warm up to people easily." Claire stood slowly. "He's a child. He's not supposed to be dealing with loss and adjustment. But he's doing it better than some adults." Ethan looked down, his voice cracking. "He talks about her sometimes. His mom. Not much, but enough." Claire looked out at the boy climbing the ladder to the treehouse. "She must have trusted you a lot." "She did, and I failed her, Claire. Not by taking him in, but by not being honest with you. I didn't want to lose both of you." Claire sighed. "You could have told me, I know, but every time I thought about it, I saw your face the day the doctor said we couldn't have kids. I couldn't give you the child we dreamed of, and then suddenly this little boy needed me. And I was terrified that if I brought him into our lives, it would feel like I was replacing something sacred." Claire didn't answer right away. The truth was a small part of her had once feared the same, that loving another child meant letting go of her own dreams, but standing here in the garden she once imagined full of life, she realized something. Grief doesn't mean the absence of love. It simply asks to be carried beside it. The days that followed were slow and strange in the best way. Claire stayed. At first she told herself it was just for a weekend. Then it was until Monday. Then it was until the next market day so she could help Ethan fix the broken back gate, and somehow she found herself staying longer. She cooked dinner again for 3 this time. Mason told her about his favorite cartoons, asked her if she knew how to draw dinosaurs, and begged her to read bedtime stories. She was rusty at it. Her voice cracked at the wrong parts, and she forgot which voices were for which characters, but Mason didn't mind. "You're the best reader," he told her one night, "even better than Dad." Mason thought about it. Different, but good. One Sunday afternoon, while Ethan was fixing the roof, Claire and Mason sat on the porch with colored pencils and paper spread out around them. "Are you gonna stay here forever?" Mason asked, completely out of nowhere. Claire paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because when you're here, Daddy smiles more." Claire's throat tightened. "I don't know yet, Mace," she said gently. "Some things take time." He looked thoughtful. "Okay. But I like it when you're here." Claire nodded. "Me too." Later that night, as they washed dishes side by side, Ethan spoke again. "I know I've broken your trust, and I know it won't be fixed overnight. But I want to try, not just for Mason. For us." Claire handed him a clean plate to dry. "I want to try too," she said. They didn't need a dramatic confession. The quiet shared work of rebuilding was enough. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, the 3 of them sat curled on the couch watching old cartoons. Mason was nestled between them, dozing off. Then, half asleep, he murmured something that made both Claire and Ethan freeze. "Night, Mom." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, but Mason was already asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She looked at Ethan. He looked back, stunned and unsure of what to say. Claire didn't say anything either. She just reached down and gently stroked Mason's hair. No, she hadn't given birth to him, but in that moment, in that soft, stolen breath before nightfall, she felt something she hadn't dared to believe in for years. She felt like a mother, and it didn't feel like a betrayal to her grief. It felt like grace, the choice that changed everything. The first snow came early that year. Claire stood at the window, mug of cocoa in hand, watching the flakes swirl like tiny white feathers in the wind. It had been nearly a month since she arrived at the country house unannounced, a month of quiet mornings, muddy boots, shared breakfasts, bedtime stories, and tentative healing. She still hadn't made a decision. Not officially. Her things were still in the guest room. Ethan hadn't asked her to move back into the master. They both knew that kind of repair didn't happen with a gesture. It happened in the spaces between. And then came the gall. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Claire was sketching a garden layout while Mason napped on the rug beside her, his little body curled into the same stuffed bear he'd clung to the first night she saw him. Ethan answered his phone in the kitchen. Claire didn't listen until she heard the edge in his voice change, lower, sharper. "Wait, what?" A pause. "Since when?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "No, I'll come in tomorrow morning." He ended the call with a heavy sigh. Claire looked up. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, then he walked over and sat across from her, his hands resting on his knees. "It's the firm," he said quietly. "There's an opening, a big one. Partner level, the kind of thing you wait years for." Claire blinked. "I thought you left the city because you needed space from all that I do," he said. But this, it's a chance to build something again. From the inside, it would mean a huge leap for us. Financially, logistically, stability. Us, as in you and me, Claire asked gently. Ethan looked her straight in the eye. Us, as in you, me, and Mason, if you'll stay, if you'll let this be a beginning, not just an end. Claire sat back, absorbing it. What would it mean for the cottage? For Mason's school? For this life? Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. We'd have to move, eventually. It's not immediate, but it's a shift. We could look into better schools for him. Therapy support, you could grow your design business, maybe open your own studio. It sounded perfect on paper, but Claire couldn't ignore the unease stirring in her chest. She glanced at Mason, who had stirred slightly in his sleep. His presence grounded her, reminded her of simplicity of slow days and healing moments. "This place gave us something, Ethan," she said. "It slowed us down, made us listen, made me realize what kind of family I want. Not just one that functions. One that feels." "I know," Ethan said softly. "That's why I'm not asking for an answer today." That night, they talked in the living room while Mason slept upstairs. For the first time in a long time, they spoke like equals. Not wounded partners, not people dancing around pain, but two humans rebuilding something. "I used to be angry," Claire admitted. "Angry that you didn't grieve the same way I did. That you could walk past the nursery door without falling apart." Ethan's eyes glistened. "I didn't walk past it. I just fell apart in silence." Claire nodded slowly. "You didn't trust me enough to fall apart in front of me. I thought I was protecting you, and I thought you were leaving me behind." They sat there in silence side by side on the couch, the soft ticking of the fireplace clock filling the space between them. After a long moment, Claire whispered, "I don't want perfect anymore. I want real. I want messy and loud and tender. I want to fight and make up and hold hands again. I want Sunday pancakes and mismatched socks and a family." Ethan turned to her. "Then let's choose that. Let's choose us." The next morning, they told Mason about the possibility of moving. His first reaction was simple. "Will there still be pancakes?" Claire laughed. "Yes, there will definitely still be pancakes." "Then, okay," Mason said, going back to drawing a wobbly dinosaur on the back of a junk mail envelope, but Claire wasn't okay. Not fully. That night after Mason was asleep, she went for a walk down the path behind the cottage through the trees to the small hilltop where they once dreamed of building a greenhouse. And the wind was cold, but the stars were brilliant. She thought of all the things she would be giving up if they moved this quiet healing space. The sense of being rooted in something simple, but then she thought of what she had almost lost: Ethan. Her marriage, her own capacity to love a child. When she returned home, Ethan was waiting on the porch. "Well," he asked, standing. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. "Don't have a clear answer. But I know this wherever we go. Next we go together. You, me, and Mason." Ethan exhaled. His breath fogged in the cold. "That's enough for me." Over the next week, they began making small shifts. Claire called a few clients in the city and let them know she might be open to taking on more projects. Ethan scheduled meetings with the firm. Mason started asking if their new home would have stairs to race down or trees to climb. One morning, Claire opened the closet to find a small wooden box she hadn't seen in years. Inside were letters, ones she'd written but never sent, and tiny ones she'd started writing to the child she never had. Tears came freely as she read through them. Not from sorrow anymore, but from gratitude, because somehow life had circled back, not with a miracle, but with choice. She placed the letters back in the box and set it beside her sketchbook. Then she walked into the kitchen where Ethan was packing Mason's lunch and kissed him softly on the cheek. "Let's build something new," she said, and this time he didn't flinch. He simply smiled. "The house we built this spring came quietly that year, like a whisper of forgiveness carried on the breeze. The last of the snow melted into the soft earth, revealing the first blush of green on the hill behind the cottage where wildflowers had begun to bloom unapologetically, as if they had always known their time would come. It had been 3 months since Claire chose to stay. 3 months of slow rebuilding, not just of a marriage, but of trust, of rhythm, of family. Mason had started school in the nearby town. Every morning, Claire walked him to the bus stop at the end of the gravel lane. He would swing her hand back and forth, asking questions about dinosaurs or cloud chase or what made pancakes fluffy. She answered with a kind of joy she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer waiting to become a mother. She already was one, not because of biology, but because of presence. Because of love, Ethan's promotion had come through. They had decided not to return to the city full-time, but to split their lives. Claire would work remotely most weeks, driving in for larger client meetings. Ethan would keep the job but push for flexibility. They would keep the cottage their anchor, the place where everything had fallen apart, and where everything had begun again. One Saturday morning, the three of them were in the backyard, digging a vegetable garden. Mason had insisted on planting watermelon seeds even though Claire warned him they needed more space. "I believe in miracles," he said, matter-of-factly, shoving the seeds deep into the soil. Claire exchanged a glance with Ethan, both of them smiling quietly. They didn't correct him. Afterward, as Mason napped under a tree with the dog they'd recently adopted from a shelter aptly named Lucky Claire, and Ethan lay on a blanket watching clouds pass. "It's not what I pictured," she said, tracing circles on Ethan's palm. "What isn't?" he asked. "This life, this path. I thought I'd have a baby in my belly, a studio in the city, you by my side in some high-rise with a skyline view, but I wouldn't trade any of this for the version I used to dream about." Ethan leaned over and kissed her temple. "Me neither." They were quiet a moment, then Ethan asked, "Do you think we should tell Mason the full story someday about his mom?" Claire nodded slowly. "Yes, when he's ready. He deserves the truth. But more than that, he deserves to know he was chosen. That he was wanted. He is," Ethan said. Every day. A month later, Claire received an email that took her breath away. It was from a publishing agent she had submitted 2 years ago. Back then, it had been a book about design, a coffee table piece with high-end spaces and clever tips the agent had passed. But this email was different. "I came across your essay in a parenting journal," the agent wrote, "about becoming a mother in a way you never expected. About grief, hope, and second chances. I cried reading it. I think others will too. Have you ever considered writing a memoir?" Claire stared at the screen, her fingers trembling. "A memoir of this story, their story." She closed her laptop and stepped outside where Mason was trying to fly a kite Ethan had made out of recycled fabric and sticks. The thing barely lifted 2 feet off the ground before spiraling down in a tangled mess. Claire laughed. Mason grinned and shrugged. "Still counts." Ethan called from the porch, "Try again, champ. Every flight gets better." And Claire thought that's the book title, Try Again. By summer, Claire's manuscript was halfway done. She wrote early in the mornings, sitting on the porch with a coffee in hand and Lucky curled at her feet. Some chapters were hard, reliving the infertility years, the silence, the betrayal, but others flowed like music. Mason's first laugh, their late-night snowball fights, the garden that somehow did grow watermelon vines despite the odds. Ethan read every chapter. Mason provided drawings for the margins. It became their shared project, a family in every word. When the book was accepted, they celebrated with pancakes and a backyard picnic under string lights. Georgia, Ethan's mother, lifted her glass. "To messy, beautiful families and the houses we build with love." Claire looked around at the mismatched plates, the half-burned burgers, Mason chasing Lucky in circles, and Ethan watching her like she was still the girl he'd fallen in love with. She thought of the night she had arrived at the cottage, terrified of what she'd find, and how what she found was not betrayal, but a beginning. Months later, the book was published, Try Again, a love story that didn't go as planned. Readers across the country wrote in. Some were women navigating infertility, some were step-parents unsure of their place. Some were husbands trying to reconnect with their wives, but all of them echoed a single sentiment. "Thank you for showing us that love doesn't always arrive the way we imagined, but it always finds a way." Claire was invited to speak at book clubs, parenting panels, even design conferences that wanted more of her story, her perspective. She never stopped being a designer, but now she redesigned lives as much as living rooms. And every time someone asked how did it all change, she would smile and say, "I showed up, I didn't run, I opened a door, I was scared to open, and I found the rest of my life waiting for me." One evening, after a long day of garden work and writing, Claire sat on the porch steps as Mason pressed his face against her belly. He looked up at her wide-eyed. "Do you think the baby can hear me?" Claire smiled, brushing his hair aside. "I think so. Talk louder just in case." And he did. About dinosaurs and pancakes and flying kites. Because sometimes miracles don't come all at once. Sometimes they come in waves, in whispers, in steps, in second chances. In the house we build brick by brick, word by word, love by love, together.